Right. Once again, apologies for the delay in starting, but we're now going to get underway. So tonight we're very privileged to have Willie Engelbrecht, who's going to talk to us about our newest national park. A little bit of info about Willie. Willie was born in Messina, and while still a youngster, his father was appointed the first park manager of Agrabie's Falls National Park. He studied at the University of Free State, where he obtained an MBA and met and married his wife, Beth. He spent most of his working career in the corporate world. Willie has been an honorary ranger for over 26 years and served on many of the management structures within the honorary rangers, including the NEC, the Interim Exco, and the National Skills Development Project. Over the years, SHR training went from strength to strength whilst Willie was on the Skills Development Committee. Willie now lives in the Cape and has his own adventure company, taking many 4x4 groups to the arid regions of Southern Africa. He is known for his love of the arid region parks, and his knowledge of them is probably unsurpassed. And with that, Willie, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Peter. And once again, my apologies. The delay was on my side. We unfortunately had load shedding this afternoon, and I think our fiber service provider had a few hiccups. So if it is okay with you, I'm just going to share my screen, and then we can kick off with our talk on the Meerkat National Park. Let me just get things going. There we are. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. And yes, welcome to all our friends on the SHR at Home webinar. Those include our SHRs from across the country. I know that quite a few Sandparks colleagues are also joining us tonight, as well as some private individuals that are interested in this very exciting newest park. I've titled my talk, "The Park with Its Eye Focused on the Sky." And the reason why I decided on that title was the Meerkat National Park actually owes its origin to a very technologically advanced radio telescope project. And I am first going to talk about this project because I think it plays a huge role. And like I said, I mean, Meerkat National Park would never have been there if it was not for this scientific project. So I'm gonna spend a few moments on that, and then we will move to a bit of orientation on the park itself, where it's located, the size, etc., and then we will move to the ecological stuff and challenges that actually face park management in order to establish this very exciting park. So the Meerkat National Park and SKA. Now, many of you may have heard about SKA. SKA stands for the Square Kilometre Array Project. So the guys are busy building a square kilometre radio telescope. And this project involves many countries all over the globe. And we will talk about that a little bit later. But the SKA was basically the reason why Meerkat National Park was formed. So SKA is a 1.7 billion euro international initiative to build the world's largest radio telescope in South Africa and Australia. So those are the two main countries that will host the biggest portion of this array. There are other countries in Africa that will also have telescopes in them. The SKA will eventually use thousands of radio telescope dishes And in Australia, up to 1 million low-frequency antennas will be placed in order to contribute to this project. The radio telescope dishes and antennas will enable astronomers to monitor the sky in unprecedented detail and survey the entire sky much faster than any system currently in existence. So it's quite interesting that the speed in which astronomers will be able to observe the skies with the SKA telescope is 10,000 times faster than the best current telescopes in the world. So that gives you an indication of why scientists are so curious about getting this project on the go. So South Africa, we were very fortunate to host the high and mid-frequency core of the SKA project in our Karoo. And the other major participating country will, of course, be Australia. And Australia will of course host the balance, the more low frequency antennas. So as you can see at the bottom of the slide, throughout South Africa and Africa, we will have 2,500 dishes, which is a huge amount. But if you think those are many, then in Australia they will have 3 million antennas in the low frequency array. I've included this slide just to give you an indication of how big the area is that are going to be taken up by the SKA radio telescopes in South Africa. So if you, this is more or less where it is situated, not more or less, it's where it is situated in the Karoo. This center portion will be the core of the SKA radio telescope, and then you will see there are 3 spirals running out from this core. So that gives you an indication actually how big the actual telescopes are. The SKA core is owned by the National Research Foundation, and it is managed by the South African Radio Astronomy Observatory. They are, of course, based in Cape Town, and they run the whole SKA project up in Karoo from observatory in Cape Town. Well, I've showed you the location of it. The core of the SKA was established in the Northern Cape between the towns of Carnarvon, Williston and Brandtvlei. So that is more or less in the middle of nowhere, and it was chosen to be placed in the middle of nowhere for a specific reason, and we will get to that just now. The activities inside the boundaries of the SKA is regulated by a specific law act that was passed in 2007. It is called the Astronomy Geographic Area Advantaged Act. And this act was passed specifically to regulate activities and specifically radio frequencies that are used in this area. And there are certain, let's call it boundaries where you may or may not use not only radio frequencies, but also equipment that can interfere with these radio telescopes. As an example, for instance, you are not allowed in the core of the SKA. You're not allowed to drive there with petrol vehicles because the electronic fuel injection of the petrol vehicles interfere with the radio telescopes. So that's just one example of that. like I said, let's call it the AGA is aimed at the prohibition and restriction of the use of specific radio frequency spectrums in certain zones. So if you look at this picture, you will see that the core, the SKA telescope core, is this middle portion colored in light blue, and then we've got the 3 spirals in purple. And then we've got what we call the SKA mid-spiral arms, the SKA or KCAA AA3 zone. So this inner zone will basically be the zone where radio frequencies will be strictly regulated. And then as we go out from this core, there will be certain restrictions applicable as well. So those of you that know the Northern Cape well will see names of towns like Pella, which is near Pofadder, towns like Prieska, Beaufort West is just down here, Calvinia. So it's a huge area that actually falls within this radio frequency restrictive zones. The Radio Astronomy Observatory in the Karoo was established originally on 2 farms. The National Research Foundation bought 2 farms in 2007, the farms Meisdam and Losberg. And most of the current SKA infrastructure is basically situated on the farms Meisdam and Losberg, and those 2 farms are only 2 of 40 farms that falls within this blue area in the middle. In 2017, the observatory has been expanded to include another 36 farms in the Karoo. So the total land size is just over 135,000 hectares of this blue portion that was included in this. So all those farms were bought up and were registered in the name of the National Research Foundation. And later, the SKA core will be expanded by these 3 spiral arms. So the Research Foundation are currently busy negotiating servitudes with 59 landowners in order to place another 21 radio telescopes in those 3 spirals. If you look at the construction of this SKA radio project, it basically happened in 4 phases. The first phase was to establish the CAT-7 telescope. So CAT stands for Karoo Array Telescope, and they have built 7 telescopes as a precursor to the Meerkat project to demonstrate to the countries involved. By the way, there are 9 countries involved in this SKA project, to show them that we are in actual fact able to host the high and mid frequency telescopes. So South Africa built these 7 telescopes, and the configuration of these telescopes, they are mere 200 meters in diameter. I'll show you a picture just now, and they are perfectly placed to observe nearby galaxies in the sky. So those are the 7 CAT telescopes that were erected, and that is in the core. These telescopes were erected on the farm Meisdam in the core of the current SKA area. The second phase was basically the Meerkat radio telescope itself, and that consists of 64 radio telescope antennas. Now, people have asked me, why do they call this Meerkat, and why is it called the Meerkat National Park? So the name of the park and the name of the area has got nothing to do with surrogates, with meerkat, stokstert meerkat, as they say. Initially, the South African government only budgeted to have 32 telescopes, to build 32 telescopes. And halfway through the project, they have decided that they will increase their budget and they will double the number of telescopes up to 64. So the original CAT, the Karoo Array Telescope project, got more telescopes, and in Afrikaans they call it, daar was meer Karoo Array Telescopes. So the name Meerkat is actually literally means that more radio telescopes were allocated to this project. Hence the name Meerkat. All these radio telescopes are locally designed. I think it is a great breakthrough for South African technology and science. They were locally designed and they were actually built on the Meerkat site itself in the Karoo in the middle of nowhere. And the Meerkat, these 64 antennas and the later 72 that will be added in the spirals, is only one of 4 precursors for the final SKA project. 2 of the precursors will be based in Australia. The Meerkat antennas, the 64 and 72 is one. And then also there is another one also situated there in the Meerkat SKA core called the Hera scopes, and we will talk about them a little bit later. So this is just a picture of this where these dishes were assembled. This huge hangar was built at the farm Losberg in the Karoo, right next to Maasdam, and these dishes were actually assembled in that hangar. And our scientists and our technicians basically erected those dishes on the farm Maasdam, adjacent to Losberg. And this is just a picture of some of the 64 radio telescopes that are already operational. So all 64 are now up and running, and they are now busy with the next phase, namely those spirals. They have already started with the spiral dishes, those 72. What is interesting, if you look at these dishes, each one of these dishes and each one of the 72 dishes will be linked to a central control center via fiber, and each one of these dishes had to get electricity, underground electricity to them in order to operate. So you can imagine that what you see here are dishes, but underneath the surface of the soil or the ground is a huge network of fiber and electricity cables, etc., etc., etc. A road network and everything. I mean, you can imagine 1.7 billion euro is quite a lot of money, and a lot of money were invested in this Karoo area as well. The third phase of the SKA project was basically those Hera radio telescopes that I spoke to you earlier about. It stands for Hydrogen Epoch of Reionization Array. And there are 350 antennas. They are already erected, and they are at Meerkat. And all they do with these antennas is they want to research the origin of the universe. So they are going back, and they basically look at gases and CO2 gases that were present when the so-called Big Bang happened and when galaxies were formed. And that is all they do with the Sierra telescope. I will give you. I'll also show you a picture just now of what they look like. One thing about these Sierra antennas, though, is they are built for a specific purpose. They are not general purpose scopes like radio telescopes, like the Meerkat telescopes. And this is what they look like. Now they look small, but each one of these, let's call it basin-like dishes, are about, I would think, I stood underneath one of them. I think they are about 40 meters in diameter. So there are 350 of them. You can see it in the background. The poles were planted already, but the dishes were not up yet, but they have completed this project now. The first phase, and the fourth phase and the last one, will then be these 3 spiral arms with the 72 radio telescopes that they are going to erect. So only 21 will fall into private landowners' land, and the rest will be incorporated into the SKA project. And this is just a picture. This green area is the current SKA core, and these spirals are then separate landowners, and the red dots will be the radio telescopes that will be erected on these spirals. I've included this picture just to give you an indication actually how big these spirals are. The northern spiral is called the Brandvlei spiral. And here you can see it actually extends from the core all the way to the town of Brandvlei in the Bushman land. It also incorporates Verneekpan, where the first land speed record in South Africa took place. The second spiral is called the Carnarvon or Van Wyksvlei spiral. There's the town of Carnarvon. You can see how big that one is. And the third spiral is the Williston spiral, going all the way down almost to Fraserburg in the south. So people ask, why this? We've got the SALT telescope, the Hubble telescope is in the air. So why do we need this Meerkat telescope? And already the messages are coming in about the awesome discoveries made with the 64 Meerkat radio telescopes. I mean, we're not even 50% down the road with the total SKA project. Look at the pictures taken of galaxies and gas masses, and I'll show you a picture that was taken of a black hole that was never discovered previously, but that they have taken with our Meerkat telescopes. What is interesting about this picture, pre-Meerkat, the only galaxies, now these pictures are all galaxies in our Milky Way. The only known galaxies that were observed previously, pre-Meerkat, were the 4 galaxies encircled in purple. And this picture was actually taken of a portion of the galaxy with our Meerkat radio telescope, and they have managed to identify 200 unknown galaxies with the use of the Meerkat precursor telescopes. So, I mean, that in itself tells you a story. What's interesting about this Sagittarius A, Sagittarius A is basically a black hole with a mass 4 million times that of our sun. So our sun is basically, if you take the mass of our sun and you multiply that with 4 million, that will give you an indication of the mass of this black hole. And there, I mean, if you look at it, you can see that it is surrounded with these electronic waves and with magnetic fields surrounding it. And this picture was taken by Meerkat, and nobody knew about this black hole in the past. So yes, technologically, scientifically, Meerkat is playing a huge role. But I think that's enough said about the SKA project and Meerkat itself. Let's turn to the Meerkat National Park and let's talk about how this park came about and what the challenges are going to be in the future. So SANParks has been appointed by the National Research Foundation as the land manager to ensure biodiversity conservation. Now, when I first heard about the Meerkat National Park's proclamation, I asked myself the question, why will SANParks be interested in a park in the middle of nowhere that may not be visited by visitors due to the radio frequency restrictions, and that will be extremely difficult to manage because of the restrictions that are there. And hopefully, with what I'm going to share with you now, will actually justify SANParks taking on this huge task to ensure not only to conserve the biodiversity. Remember, these 40 farms were intensively farmed, and the biodiversity and ecosystems were basically destroyed in these farms. So the task of SANParks will not only be to conserve, they will first have to reestablish and to secure the integrity of the ecology of that park. So Meerkat National Park was declared on the 27th of March 2020, a mere 2 years ago. And those of you will remember, 27 March 2020 was exactly when COVID struck and when lockdown was implemented. So you can imagine that in the last 2.5 years, really very little happened in the park. It is only in the last 6 to 8 months that things really started to happen as far as the national park are concerned. So the 40 farms or portions of farms that were bought out by the NRF is 135,245 hectares big, and that is also the size of the Meerkat National Park. And those farms were included in the contractual park, and that's very important to take cognizance of this. This is not the park does not belong to SANParks. It's a contractual park, and the contract and the memorandum of understanding was entered into between the NRF and SANParks. This park, of course, is unique in its approach to conservation in general. One can, you've got the NRF on the one side and you have SANParks on the other side. They've basically joined forces. They don't necessarily share the same objectives. As a matter of fact, in certain ways, some of the objectives may be actually conflicting each other. So there's a huge task for SANParks to actually to actually meet their objectives in the Meerkat National Park. The primary function of the park will be to support research across astronomy, biophysical and social spheres, and to ensure the mandate of SANParks is achieved. Like I said, extremely difficult task. One thing that is significant, though, is that this park will not be a traditional national park where there is a strong emphasis on tourism experience. And the main reason for that is, when these telescopes are operational and when they look at the sky, very little interference in terms of vehicles and all of that will be tolerated inside the park, inside the core of the park. So for the foreseeable future, the park will definitely not focus on tourism, the traditional tourism. There will not be game drives and tourist accommodation necessarily at the beginning. I think that will come much later. So the typical tourism products and activities will definitely be absent in the beginning. Now that in itself poses a big question mark and say, oh, but no tourists, why then take on the park? And one may very much answer yourself by saying maybe it is time that we actually focus on what we're there for, namely to protect and conserve. And maybe take the focus a little bit off the tourism side. And I think this offers SANParks the ideal opportunity in order to pursue their real core business, namely like to conserve and to protect the environment. So SANParks is committed to the priority for the conservation of biodiversity, cultural heritage, and to facilitate socio-economic development. And remember those three aspects, because we're going to come back to the biodiversity, cultural heritage, and socio-economic development in Meerkat National Park. Where is it situated? We already had a look at it, but in terms of its location and orientation against our other parks, there we can see exactly where it is located. Like I said, our chairperson, Mr. Paul Caldert's he's baie braggerig about Bloemfontein that's in the middle of the country, but I think Meerkat will be more in the middle of the country than what Bloemfontein is. If you look at the regional context, we already said that the Meerkat National Park falls basically, if you draw a line between Brandvlei, Van Wyksvlei, Carnarvon in the south and Williston in the south, that's basically where it is situated. The nearest town and services will be delivered by the town of Carnarvon. It is by far the closest. It's about 90 kilometers from the park, and there is a tar road that services the core, connects the core with Carnarvon. This is just to give you an indication of what the future infrastructure of the park will be. Of course, these are the radio telescopes, these brown telescopes, and the dotted lines are overhead electrical lines that will service the three spirals. But apart from that, it gives you an indication of the road network. There will be 4 access points to the park. The one in the northwest is the road that comes from Brandvlei. These 2 at the bottom are the road that connects Williston with the core, and the one on this side connects Carnarvon. So in itself, 4 access points into the national park. There's an airstrip in the middle of the park that was built by the NRF. And then these black structures with the flags on top, those will be Sandpark's ranger outposts. And currently the offices are located in Carnarvon, but later they will move to the farm called Swartfontein, that red dot over there. They will move into the park. So it's a long story why they're not there yet. Keep in mind that inside this core area, you may not use radios. You may not use microwave ovens. You may not use petrol engines. You may not use DSTV or television or cell phones for that matter. As a matter of fact, when I traveled into that core area, the NRF has got on Losberg, they've got a pickup facility that picks up any frequency that interferes with the telescopes. Now, I had tire monitors on my 4 tires that actually monitors the tire pressure and conveys it via Bluetooth to a little screen in my vehicle. They picked those Bluetooth signals up on my vehicle. I mean, I was 40 kilometers away from Losberg. They actually picked it up and they disabled those signals of the Bluetooth. That just shows you how sensitive they are for radio frequency interference. So they are still in a process of securing the Swartfontein Park head office in order not to interfere with the radio frequencies of SKA. The management structure of the park, Mr. Hendrik Malgas, he's the current park manager, and he will run the park. Reporting to him will be an administrative officer, a section ranger who's already appointed, and also a social, economic and transformation officer. There will be 4 general workers, a ranger corporal and 3 field rangers at this stage will serve the park in future. So the Meerkat National Park falls within the Namakaroo biome. It's basically right slab bang in the middle of the Namakaroo biome, one of the 10 biomes in South Africa. And the Namakaroo biome, basically the climate of that biome is determined by the following. So Namakaroo is a semi-arid environment. It's actually very dry. I mean, they had one of the most severe droughts ever in the last 7-8 years. The farm Beesdam, to the south of the park, adjacent to the park, the owner there, Frans Low, his average rainfall for the past 6 years was 16 millimeters per annum. So that gives you an idea of the severe drought that, and I no need to tell you, I think those of you that watch TV and the news on TV will know that the Bushmanland and the Van Wyksvlei area, Brandvlei, the whole Bushmanland up to Pofadder underwent extreme droughts in the last year. So the determinants of climate, of course, is the degree of latitude. The park falls 30.5 degrees south. That's typical subtropical high pressure belt. And due to the Hadley cells, that brings in dry air and open skies, very little rain. The distance from the sea, of course, plays a huge role. It's a typical continental type climate and not a moderate marine type climate. And then, of course, the elevation and topography of the area influences both rainfall and temperature. The topography of the area is very interesting, and we're going to have a look at the topography of the park just now. But if we look at the general climatic conditions of the park, and I know this is very busy, but if we quickly have a look at rainfall, you will see very little rainfall days per month. It varies between 0.2 and about 8 days per month. In February is your highest rainfall measured, and the rainfall typically spring and summer rainfall area. Temperatures vary. The maximum temperatures vary from 18 degrees to in the mid-30s, and your minimum temperatures from 8 degrees to about 23 degrees average minimums. Wind speeds are moderate, and your highest wind months are December, January, February, and then your humidity and UV index with it. But we spoke about the topography, and what is quite interesting about the topography of the park itself. Now, this is the park, and you can, if you look at the topography, you can actually count. You can actually count almost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 different landscapes in the park. So in the south, your highest portion of the park is towards the south and the southeast. There you have quite a lot of dolerite. The center portion of the park is plains and shrubland, where you have a lot of shale and sandstone, and the north are basically pans, and washes and your rivers and stuff like that. But you will agree, I mean, in Ireland, to have 16 landscape types in 139 hectares is quite diverse. I have superimposed the park. These are all the farms that were bought out onto a satellite picture, just to give you an indication. And like I said earlier, here you can see the south and southeast of the park is quite mountainous. The middle of the park, this portion here, is basically plains, and then we have these huge pans and in the northern part of the park. So typical dolerite slopes. These pictures were taken in the park itself. They've got the most beautiful dolerite columns in those Carrier Mountains to the south of the park, with your dolerite plateaus on top. A lot of shale. These shales are of the ECA group, of the Karoo supergroup. And at the back, you can see those dolerite slopes. There are some more ECA group shales. And those plains in the center of the park are basically shale plains. And here you can see how very little vegetation grows on these shale plains. Calcrete outcrops, pans in the north, like we said. There are quite a few drainage lines with dolerite at the back there. And then, of course, a lot of saline plains and saline drainage lines throughout the park. This picture was taken of the highest point of the park there on top of this Inselberg there, typical Karoo Inselbergs topped by dolerite. That point is 1,450 meters plus minus high. By the way, the park, the lowest point in the park is about 900 meters, and it goes up to 1,450, which gives us a gradient of just over 500 meters from north to south. So the current state of affairs in the park is basically when Sandparks took over. They took over 135 hectares of overgrazed and degraded land. They inherited one of the longest and severest droughts in human memory. There are very little wildlife left. You can imagine the farms basically, when the farmers left, of course, they took whatever they could, and I think they hunted whatever was left, and the few that was still left over was basically hunted by poachers. And when Sandpark stepped in 2 years ago, there were very little wildlife left in the park. And then, of course, and we will talk about that, the extent of alien plant invasion is huge in the park currently. There's quite a significant number of heritage sites in the park, and we will quickly have a look at those. And then also, when I say that there's a unique relationship between the NRF and Sandparks, I mean that it is actually a very complicated relationship between the two. NRF, they've got their goals, Sandparks have got their goals, and sometimes, like I said earlier, it is conflicting, but I may add that currently there's actually a very good working relationship between the SKA staff and the Sandpark staff. And then, of course, they also inherited quite a distrusting neighboring community to the park. You can imagine that buying up 40 farms, taking out 40 families, had a huge impact on the economy of those rural towns. Promises were made, and actually, between us, the farmers had no choice. But their land was actually expropriated. They got a very fair price for their land, but they had no choice to sell to the state. So there's a bit of uneasiness, if I can put it that way, left with the people that remained in the environs, and that, of course, poses a bit of a problem, or can pose problems for the future. And then there are quite a number of species of special concern, not a lot, but they are. And then also unique vegetation zones. So if we look at the vegetation zones, this is a map of the vegetation zones of the park. The black line is the park border, and there are basically 4 vegetation zones within the park. The biggest one, 68% of the park, is classified as Bushman land basin shrubland, and we will have a look at the typical pictures of what that looks like. The second biggest portion is Upper Karoo Hardeveld, the mountainous area, those grey areas in the south. Then we've got the western Upper Karoo. Although I've placed the wording outside the park, you can see there's a small portion, about 5% of the park, in the southeastern section of the park. And then, of course, in the north, those green areas are quite a unique vegetation type, Bushman land flora. 7% of the park is formed by that. It's very poorly researched, and it's quite a unique vegetation type, and certainly worthwhile to be protected. The Bushman land flora that falls inside the Meerkat National Park are basically the only protected Bushmanland flora in the whole of Bushmanland. So Sandparks certainly have got a big role to play there. So the status of plant structure and function, there are 223 plant species recorded for Meerkat National Park. The main drivers of the current plant structure and function in the park is aridity. it's very dry. The grazing history of the park, and then of course alien plant encroachment plays a huge role in that. So if we spoke about the bushmanland basin shrubland, this is a picture. You can somewhat see from this picture that it's very dry, and because of the overgrazing and the drought, what we call driedoring, the Rhegosum trichotomum, the driedorings took over and poses quite a huge problem to rehabilitate those areas. This is also still bushmanland basin shrubland, and your typical plants that you will get there, your lyciums, your creedorings, your driedorings or three thorns, your pensias, your anker karoo, Eriocephalus are your kapok bossies, etc. Those are the typical plants that you get in that area. In your upper Karoo Hardeveld, and this is very exciting, the Meerkat National Park actually houses huge Aloidendron dichotomum, your kokerboom forests. And this is a picture of some of them. They are very healthy, and there's a large proportion of young plants in the park. There's another picture of those quiver trees. Also, a very interesting geological feature. These zebras, these mountains are called the Zebra Mountains. They are basically dolerite, and they form these sort of zebra lines. And there's a specific way they are formed, and I'm not going to go into that now. So your Western Upper Karoo, this is typical Western Upper Karoo veld. Also Western Upper Karoo with the plants that occur in that vegetation type. Quite a number of waterways, and they are tree-lined, mainly Cercia, your career trees, and also your creedoring and reeds. This river specifically is actually not a dry river. It is fed by a spring that runs 365 days of the year. Very strong spring. And then your bushmanland flora, that's 7% in the north. This is typically what they look like. The middle of these pans are basically without vegetation, and the fringes of it, those margins, you will find your Rhegosums, Lyciums, and Salsola plants. The reason why I put this picture up is after good rain, and you can actually see here that the rain clouds are. So this picture was taken in that bushmanland shrubland, that big portion in the middle of the park, just prior to the good rains. And after the good rains, this is the type of veld that you will get. I mean, huge displays of daisies and annuals, and it can overnight basically turn into a garden, flower garden. Look at those grass. Your grasses that you get there are mainly your bushman grasses, your Stipagrostis grasses. So as far as mammals are concerned, there are 29 mammal species recorded in the park. None of these species are currently considered as threatened. And it also includes mesopredators such as blackback jackal and caracal, which poses a huge problem to the neighboring farmers. And camera trap photos that were taken in the park, there you can see bat-eared foxes, caracal, your roikata, kudu, and the porcupine. Like I said, blackback jackals, you don't need camera traps for them. As you drive through the park, you see many of them, and they pose a huge problem for the neighboring sheep farmers. As far as birds are concerned, there are 250 plus minus 250 bird species recorded in the park, 3 of which are of concern. And I would like to go through them. 2 endemics have been classified as vulnerable and near threatened, and 1 endemic is a priority species. And these are the pictures. The red lark is the highest priority resident species, and it is classified as vulnerable. And they occur in the park, especially in that red dune area. The Sclatus lark is classified as near threatened. And then, of course, the cinnamon-breasted warbler is also a species of concern, another priority species. So apart from those 3 species, the other species are quite common. You do get eagles and your jackal buzzards and corey bustards and all of that in the park. So what are the biodiversity objectives of sandparks? They are basically to restore the ecological integrity lost by agricultural practices, remove fences, overcome and restore the overgrazing and erosion that goes with that, and alien animal species. In some of those mountains, they do have these mountain goats, alien species there, and they're busy eradicating those. And then, of course, I've already mentioned massive alien plant invasion. And I'll show you a picture of the extent of that. And then the conservation of species of special concern, those birds, not only animals, but of course plants as well, and to reintroduce species that historically occurred in that area. So conservation of species of special concern, I mean, I already mentioned those quiver tree forests. They are very special. Quiver trees, currently in the succulent Karoo, they are busy dying, and here we've got healthy populations of that. Hoodia gordoni, as we know, were heavily poached until recently, and there are very healthy specimens of these plants in the park. The alien invader challenge is quite severe. There are 93 alien invasive plant species in the park. Most of them were brought in by farmers, and they occur mainly in and around farmsteads and also in the waterways. Now, this picture shows you the infestation of the Prosopis glandulosa trees, the mesquite or suidwestdoring as we call them in Afrikaans, in the park. These are basically waterways, and the green indicates the infestation of Prosopis in the park. And I think you will agree that if you put those green areas together, it will almost be 20% of the park that are infested by these Prosopis trees. There you can see. At one stage, I asked the park manager, I said, Hendrik, do you think you are going to win this war? He said to me, at this stage, their main focus will be to contain the invaders and to keep them from expanding. And then they will eat it like elephant, happy for happy, as they say in Afrikaans. Preservation of heritage, there are quite a number of sites with sun artifacts, also sites with sun petroglyphs in the park itself, and those need to be protected. We all saw what happened in the Richtersveld when people get to it and put their own next to that. And then also there's definitely specific architectural structures that need to be protected. This is a cobalt house. This is the most northern cobalt house in South Africa, and that occurs on the farm De Hoek in the Meerkat National Park. They are typically round houses. This one was a square house, and this is typically the type of houses that the farmers, when they first move into that area, built. They had no wood to build or clay to build houses, and grass to put roofs on, so they used what was available, and it was rocks. And if you go inside this specific house, this is what the roof structure of that house looked like. This farmhouse, Groot Paardekloof, is a national heritage site, and that farmhouse was identified to be restored and to be protected. There are numerous graveyards throughout the park. When I say numerous, maybe I would say at least 30 graveyards throughout the park that need to be taken care of and looked after. And then, of course, the social and economic objectives. First of all, they will have to identify and develop exclusive techno-ecotourism opportunities. And there are opportunities, and sandparks can sit with NRF and see if they can develop techno-ecotourism in the park itself. They can also contribute to local economic development by creating employment opportunities for the locals, albeit not big, but at least they can. And then also to build and maintain constantly improve relationships between the park and its relative internal and external stakeholders, adjacent farmers, NRF, SKA guys. So that's basically Meerkat National Park, and that is what the park is all about. I'm quite excited about the possibilities. It is a park that poses huge challenges to sandparks to, first of all, reinstate the integrity, the ecological integrity, and then to start to protect those. So basically, Peter, that's my story about the Meerkat National Park. I hope that it was interesting to our listeners. I don't know if there are any questions.
Hi, Willie. Thank you very much for that. Brought back some memories of when we went there before. Yes, there are a couple of questions. I will start with one from Peter Berger. He says, why are the dishes in this array? I presume he's talking about the three arms when he says that. By the way, the picture behind me is Meerkat.
Yeah. Yes, Peter, you're quite right now. Quite a few honorary rangers had the opportunity to visit Meerkat with us, and they have already attended, like you, have attended the introductory course to the Meerkat National Park, and it was quite nice to have the guys there. Yes, those spiral arms, of course, you know, we must remember that the African SKA, square kilometer array, high frequency telescopes are the 64 telescopes in the middle, and the mid-frequency ones are situated in those spirals. Now, the way they were placed, you know, I don't want to go into that. That is, of course, was worked out by researchers and astronomers. By the way, that there will be thousands of other radio telescopes situated in countries up to Ghana in Africa that will form part of the South African SKA array. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's basically what they are there for.
Right, thank you. A quick comment from Tony Rabello. Sagittarius A is our black hole in the center of the Milky Way, he says, just so that we know that we've got our own black hole.
Yes.
Okay. Another quick question from Peter Berger. What influence will this frequency pollution have on the environment from the telescopes? I think the whole point is there is no pollution from this, if I'm not mistaken. So I'll let you answer that one.
Yeah, no, I think, Peter, that's exactly why that location was chosen, because there are no radio frequency, and the only possible frequency interference or pollution that remained was removed from the area. So it is basically frequency free.
Okay. A quick question from Dr. Llewellyn Taylor. How does the Meerkat and SKA compare to the James Webb Space Telescope in terms of ability to detect and produce images going back into the vast, distant past?
Yeah, Peter, you must pardon me now. I'm an ecologist. I'm not a astronomer. So I was asked to talk about, I only gave the background on the astronomy just as a matter of interest. So I really don't know the answer to that.
I think it's looking at different frequencies. I know that James Webb looks at infrared, and obviously these are looking at different radio frequencies. So maybe one day we'll get a scientist to give us the true answer. So sorry, Llewellyn, but we can't give you the definitive answer there. Okay, Remco says, I have a question after listening to you. I'd like to know if the park has the same protection as other national parks. What I understand is the NRF owns the land and Sandparks manage it, which tells me that there are still mineral rights. Am I correct? Having seen this conversation come up recently at the Indaba, I will guarantee the government has sorted those mineral rights out long before it got to this stage.
Yeah, no, you're quite right, Peter.
Okay, and then last one from Louis Janssen van Vuren. I think I know it. There's another one. But anyway, is the riverine rabbit one of the species that would be reintroduced?
I doubt if it will be reintroduced to that area. By the way, the riverine rabbit does not occur in the Meerkat National Park, but not far from there. It does occur there. So, it may be successfully be reintroduced into that area, but currently it is so endangered where it occurs that I don't think, from an ecological point of view, there's going to be much interference with them where they are currently. But who's to say? Maybe in a few couple of years, they may decide to do that. It's certainly not on the radar at the moment.
Okay, I just want to give Gail Boshoff a quick answer. She asked about accommodation. Gail, that was answered earlier in the thing. Currently, there are no plans for accommodation right there. I think here we have a tongue-in-the-cheek one from William Elliott. How does Eskom keep the lights on? I seem to remember some very big diesel generators parked around that place.
Yeah, there are huge underground generators. They've got 3 units underground with huge diesel tanks, and if there's load shedding, they just start those jennies.
I think one of the things that I remember from that, which you didn't mention, is the fiber line that runs from there all the way to Cape Town. Their own specific fiber connection. You see it strung between all the poles there. Yeah. Right. David Hill asks, with regard to the alien invasive issue, the use of drones to both analyze and control populations was proposed through Sandparks. Do you think this is still an avenue to pursue? What are the pros and cons apart from radio interference?
Yeah. Unfortunately, Peter, drones are very successfully used to eradicate the alien plants in the Eastern Cape, but the drones are not allowed because of the radio frequency interference. The Sandparks are not even allowed to use petrol-driven chainsaws to take down these prosopis. So it's a very sensitive thing, and drones are definitely not allowed in that core area.
Yeah, you talking about chainsaws refreshes my memory that they had to use diesel generators with electric chainsaws in order to cut things up.
Yeah.
Anyway, right, those are the questions. So, Willie, thank you very much for One more has just quickly popped up. How will the eradication of invader vegetation be financed? I think that's a tough question that Sandparks would like to answer themselves. But anyway.
Yeah, of course, they will get the work for water teams in, and it will be much of the. I must admit that the NRF is not turning their backs. They are not turning their backs supporting Sandparks with budget on biodiversity conservation. So they make huge contributions towards the Sandparks operating budget. And I think between Sandparks, the NRF, and the Working for Water teams, they will eventually manage to win this. But it's going to take quite a few years. It's not an overnight thing.
Okay, Willie, great. Thank you very much for joining us. I've switched your share screen off for now. So there we go. Thank you to everybody else who joined us. A quick note that we have a very special webinar coming up on the 28th. Prof. Peter Ryan is going to talk to us about his work with seabirds, and I think anybody who's a bird watcher will have heard that name and know about the work that he's been done, and he's going to talk to us about how plastic pollution is affecting marine systems, etc. So I think that will be a really interesting talk on September the 28th. That's 2 weeks' time. So once again, Willie, thank you, and thank you everybody else who joined us. It was really a really informative talk, and I think it's a subject which, even though Willie, as he said, he's not a scientist, he gave us quite a bit of information about the SKA, Meerkat, and whatever, and how it all works, and the park itself. Hopefully, in a few years' time, we'll all be able to go there and help the staff eradicate some of that mesquite, because it grows everywhere. So anyway, once again, thank you for joining us. And for those of you who have joined us who don't know about the Ornery Rangers, we're a group of volunteers who help Sandparks in all of their parks. We buy equipment for them, we do work for them, we help them with maintenance, we help them with all sorts of things, all of which we do on a volunteer basis, the mileage, the travel, the time, etc. But we do always need funds to buy equipment, backpacks, boots, walkie-talkies, radios, all sorts of things. So we would really appreciate any small to large donations. So once again, last few words from me. Thank you for joining us. Hope we'll see you all in 2 weeks' time. Thank you and good night.